Hello and welcome to Nature Live Online. I'm Alison, your host for today. Now, if you're new to Nature Live, these events are usually a chance for you to meet some of the scientists that were behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum in London. But today's event is a little bit different. Today, we're taking you behind the lens at our Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. I'm going to be speaking to wildlife photographer Ami Vitale, finding out all about her fantastic work, her brilliant life in photography, and discovering the story behind her very poignant image, The Last Goodbye, which was one of your favourites in this year's Wildlife Photographer of the Year People's Choice Awards. Now, if you've got any comments or questions at all for Ami during the show, please do put those in the chat. We would love to hear from you. We'll do our best to answer some of your questions during the show. And if you're enjoying the talk, do consider leaving us a small donation. The museum is a charity, and with our doors closed, we are losing vital income. So if you're happy and able to spare just a small donation, we would very much appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, the donate button is just above the chat. If you're on our website, it's in the top right-hand corner of the page. But let me introduce you to our guest for today. Now, Ami Vitale has travelled to more than 100 countries, documenting incredible human and wildlife stories. She's lived in mud huts and war zones. She's contracted malaria. She's worn a panda suit, more on that later, all keeping true to her belief in the importance of living the story. I am super excited to speak to her today and to show you some of her amazing images as well. So let's say a very big hello to Ami.
Hi, Alison.
Hey, Ami, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I can't wait for people to hear your amazing stories and to see your images. But let's find a little bit about you first of all. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you actually first got started in photography.
Well, I'm probably the most unlikely person you can imagine doing this job, because if you knew me as a younger child and young woman, I was really introverted, painfully shy, gawky, and afraid of the world, really, in a lot of ways, afraid of people. And my parents in the beginning were trying to do everything to give me a little more confidence. And they thought maybe by putting me in front of the camera and sometimes dressing me up as a lion might somehow give me courage. But I never got my courage from that. I got my courage from that little black box. Something about holding this camera in my hands just gave me the confidence to literally dive into situations that I didn't have the courage to do before. And I think as I got into photography, I realized more and more that the extraordinary thing wasn't that it was this tool for my own empowerment. It was really an incredible tool to amplify voices, tell important stories. And, and that actually led into even amplifying the stories of animals and wildlife. And, but I started on a path of really photographing the human condition all over the planet.
Right, because you started out photographing human conflicts, didn't you? So what brought you to wildlife photography?
Well, I started to realize, I was actually really interested in understanding why there was so much conflict, and kind of set down this path of learning about the great disparities in our world. And as I got more and more into it, I realized that you can't talk about any of these human conflicts without talking about the natural world, that they are absolutely connected. And everything, in fact, I think a lot of people realize that their lives depend on nature for their outcomes. And so that kind of took me down this path of realizing I needed to tell these stories of what we're doing to the natural world, because ultimately it impacts all of us.
Absolutely, that connectedness, our connection to the natural world. It's so interesting that you talk about that, because that's absolutely something that we are keen to kind of highlight at the museum. Humanity as a part of nature, not apart from nature. How do you bring out those connections in your photography? What kinds of stories are you trying to tell?
Well, I started on, I think that this picture that we're going to talk about later was really the story I started 12 years ago. And it was a story about these northern white rhinos. Maybe I'll wait till later to talk about that.
Sure.
Um, but that was the story that really made me understand that we have to do something right now, that, we're witnessing these extinctions of species, and something about meeting those rhinos and really understanding how few of them were left on the planet just captured my heart and made me understand that I loved wildlife films, and it was always sort of these, blue chip films, and it was pristine nature, and there was never a human being in any of these stories for so long. And I started to question that, because I've lived in so many places, and really remote places, even here in Montana. And basically, nowhere can you go on the planet anymore where human beings have not been. And I just feel like we need to start including that as part of these stories to hopefully find a solution forward. And so I really began to seek out stories where, maybe imperfect as it is, deeply flawed sometimes, but people are trying to find a way to coexist and live with wildlife. And I think that, it's not an ideal situation, but in many ways, it's all we have. And I was really very interested in not just showing the beautiful wildlife pictures, even though they are wondrous and capture my heart too. But I understand that if we have to include humanity in these stories to understand a way forward.
Absolutely. And there is so much great work going on. There are positive stories out there. You've done some work in China, haven't you, with pandas? Tell us about that story.
I have. I was really privileged to be a part of a film crew who was there to photograph this captive born panda named Hope as she was leaving home forever. She was being rewilded. And as many of your viewers know, it's not an easy thing to do. They literally need to be trained for years how to live in the wild again, because after one generation in captivity, they don't remember that. So I got frontline access to the story, and I knew that this was an incredible story, that the Chinese government does not give access to everybody to the story. So I wanted to be empathetic to the panda, and our team dressed up in these ghillie suits to camouflage ourselves and kind of won the heart of the head of the panda program, who's affectionately called Papa Panda. So Papa Panda saw, afterwards, he saw I was hiding behind a tree, documenting this moment, and he came up afterwards and thanked me for being thoughtful and thinking of this panda. And then he said afterwards, "You are going to get to hold 2 baby pandas. And I want you to know, President Obama, he only held 1." And so I knew at that moment that I had access to an amazing story. And not only did I get 2 baby pandas, they laid out their bumper crop of baby pandas. I mean, look how adorable. There's that little fellow in the back trying to escape. And I mean, I knew at this moment, so I immediately went to National Geographic, who I'm a contract photographer for, and said, "I have access to this incredible story." And I was super excited about it, and they rejected it right away. And I said, "Why?" They said, "Well, we did a story 8 years ago." And in National Geographic time, 8 years ago is like yesterday. So I had to really research everything I could. I read every single book about pandas and I read so much that I really felt like I was thinking like a panda bear, and repitched the story. They accepted it. And then I went on this 3-year long journey, not 3 consecutive years, but I made 5 trips over 3 years to document this extraordinary story that, I mean, frankly, it just blew my mind as I started to learn more about this animal, which in many ways we've turned into this almost clownish cartoon character. People see them as stuffed animals, they see them in, cartoons, and they can't imagine what a majestic, ancient, almost mythical creature. I mean, they've been on the planet for millions of years. And if you can imagine, the first ones were captured alive only in 1936, which is shocking. And when you think about that and look at ancient Chinese art, you will see representations of every other kind of predator, other bears, even bamboo. You'll never see a representation of a panda bear. They were so elusive. They'd hide out in these thick bamboo forests on tippy tops of trees away from humanity and remained hidden for a lot of time. And I find that a remarkable piece of the story.
Mm. Absolutely, and you're totally right about this idea of them being clownish, and this notion that they don't breed, they're not good at breeding. That's not true at all, is it?
Well, no, they weren't good at breeding in captivity because
Yes.
we human beings didn't understand them. And finally, Papa Panda cracked the code after decades of studying them. I mean, they literally would wheel television sets of pandas mating, panda porn for the males, and they would give them Viagra, and they were going through all these desperate steps to try to get the pandas to breed. And then finally, Papa Panda Zhang Hemin, he figured it out. And it was that the females only have 24 to 72 hours in a year to get pregnant. It's not a big window. And the second really important thing is she needs choice. You can't throw any old male panda bear in front of her. Give her some panda bears. So anyway, they figured it out, and they have a very successful breeding program. And I was able to witness that. And when they're born tiny, blind, helpless, 1/900th the size of their mother. They,
Wow.
they don't even look anything like a panda bear. And then they are one of the fastest growing mammals. So they grew like little bamboo shoots in front of my eyes, and they would weigh them every day. And it was an extraordinary experience.
So amazing to get that close access, but not easy either. There were quite a few challenges. What tell us about this panda suit?
Okay, well, so the best part of the story is, it was literally like being I felt like I was inside a Wes Anderson film. Every day, all the keepers, the scientists, and myself had to dress up in these panda costumes that were scented, of course, with panda urine and feces, because pandas go by smell, not sight. And so the reason is they should never be comfortable around human beings, the ones that were being trained to go back to the wild. And so we weren't really allowed to get that. This is one of the keepers that's cleaning the enclosure. But for the most part, they were most of the day and out in the wild, and they would come back in, but very little human interaction. And yes, it was so bizarre. And I just, I loved it in this funny way. Yeah. It was
It's
surreal.
absolutely amazing, and I imagine not easy to actually photograph a panda in the wild. They are so elusive.
Well, that's the funny thing. It looks like a story about adorable, cuddly little bears, and they are, but it was much deeper and richer than that.
Mm.
And, and it required a lot of patience because they are so elusive. And even when they were out in their huge enclosures, like I would climb up a mountain every day, and it was only at the very end that Panda kind of came out. And it just took a lot of patience, and they are bears with teeth and claws and big predators.
Of
So you have
course,
to,
yeah.
you don't get close to them, and it's like any wildlife. So it just took time.
It's a wonderful story, and a really important story, and a positive one as well. It shows what we can do when we put our minds to it, when we really get behind something.
Well, I learned a lot from that story. And, I learned, first of all, I think there's beautiful stories all around us. And sometimes we tend to focus only, for example, when you think of China, people really focus on the bad environmental stories. And you can't imagine anything good is happening if you only read, sort of a lot of the media that comes out. And I really believe that we need to do more to search for some stories that surprise us. And the other thing I learned about it was that they really turned this country. The panda has actually been delisted from the most endangered, and their numbers are going up in the wild. They have massive reforestation programs going on. They're linking existing corridors for the wild populations to move. And there's just extraordinary things that you never hear about. And I just have to ask that question. Like, we as journalists need to do a much better job of finding some of these stories that I think remind us of what we can achieve again.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we do have another of those stories. But just before we move on, we've had a question from YouTube, Amy, for you. Someone was asking what your favorite animal to photograph is and why.
So I'm sorry, I'm so boring, but I love if you go deeply into any subject, you fall in love. You absolutely can't help but fall in love. And I think you start to realize how interconnected we are, from the tiniest of creatures that we can't even see to, the magical sort of keystone species. I mean, I focused a lot of my work on charismatic species, but I have to say I'm fascinated by the kind of mysterious unknown too, that we don't see.
Fantastic.
Sorry.
No, that's good enough for me. But let's move on to talk about your image, The Last Goodbye, because not all conservation stories have quite such a happy outcome. But so for those of you who haven't seen Amy's image yet, we will show that in just a short while. But it's a fascinating story. So Amy, tell us how this image first came about, how you first met Sudan.
So back in 2009, I heard about this crazy plan to move 4 northern white rhinos from a zoo, the Kralo Zoo in the Czech Republic, back to Africa in this last-ditch effort to save an entire species. And look at this creature. I mean, they look prehistoric. These gentle, hulking, majestic creatures captured my heart. And when I saw, if you don't mind going back to that first image, when I first set eyes, I literally felt like I had met a unicorn. I mean, it was just so mythical to get that close to this beautiful species. And when you think about it, like up until about 100 years ago, there were probably tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of rhino roaming the open plains of Africa, right? But on that day, there were 8 of them alive, all in zoos. And I have to say, it made me cry. I was so heartbroken and realized back then at that moment that I was at the start of documenting a species going extinct, that this would happen in my lifetime. And this is what it looked like. They were the only reason they're still alive is because of these zoos. They had been poached to extinction in the wild. And because the Kralo Zoo in San Diego had two northern white rhinos, because of their work, there were still, there was hope that there was a breeding population. So they were training them to go into these crates here, and then they were going to fly them. And so I began following this story then. And yeah, so we can go to the next picture. This is how we imagine, if you go to the next photo, this is how we imagine rhinos roaming the open plains of Africa, but this is how it actually looks. They have to be guarded around the clock 24/7 by heavily militarized men. And the value of their horn is worth, I mean, I don't know how much. It's one of the most precious, sort of most expensive things you can buy in the world today. And, really the horn is just simply keratin. It's the same stuff in our fingernails and hair. That's it. But, it's just epic proportions. The demand has gone up, and they are literally being poached before our eyes. And so I started to research this story and wanted to really understand it. And everything I read always focused on the poaching wars, send more guns, train women to be soldiers, like whatever you could do, just militarize it and save these animals. And I felt like one really important question was always being left out. And I just started asking myself, like, well, what do the indigenous people living with the wildlife in their backyard, what do they think? And I found that story, that piece of the story, was largely being left out 12 years ago when I began. And so I went on this search to kind of find out what do people think? And it turns out there are beautiful stories that really we can be amplifying their voices. We can be supporting these communities that do protect the wildlife in their backyard and do understand the value of it and love them just like anybody does. So I think that is something I've really chosen to focus on.
Absolutely, those positive stories, and there is, as we say, there's a lot going on. The relationship between the local communities and these big animals like the rhinos and the elephants and even giraffes as well. These stories are out there, aren't they?
There's lots of stories, and even in your backyard, even if you're in an urban area, there's so much incredible conservation work going on all around us. And I think that's the secret right now, is just, all of us can be a messenger. Every single one of us has the opportunity. I find that the messenger is often more important than the message itself. So not enough of us are actively engaged in thinking about the planet and caring about the planet. And this is at some of these, if you back up, the giraffe story is up in Naminyak Wildlife Conservancy, where Sarara Camp is. And I mean, I love these beautiful bonds between these giraffe get rewilded. And it's amazing because the wild giraffe come back to check on, this is Lacupinae, and they will, they're out, they've had babies, they're, out amongst the wild herd, and they come back to see Lacupinae and check on him. I find that incredible. So these are sentient creatures that we just don't know enough about. And I think that realizing that, it just opens up your sensitivity, and you just realize how little we all really know. And to maybe if we could all be a little more humble and, just a little more, have more humility about the world that we live in, we may, there's still quite a lot to do and a lot of hope out there to protect the diversity that exists right now.
Absolutely, but occasionally that hope can be quite fragile, can't it? Let's take a look at your image, the last goodbye, and tell us what's going on in this image.
So this image was a moment I never hoped to witness again. It was Sudan, who was the last male northern white rhino, moments before he passed away. And that is Jojo Wachiro, who is one of his keepers, who spends his life with these rhinos. Today, there's only 2 of them left. And Jojo, just the bonds again are so profound. And, when he came and leaned in Sudan literally leaned his heavy head right into Jojo's. And, something about this just, it really catches me every time when I think about it, because
Mm,
it's so symbolic of, I think, the choice is in our hands. It's like, what path do we choose? Do we become the greatest protector of these creatures, or do we destroy everything on this planet there that we're living with? And I feel like, looking at this picture and experiencing this moment, you realize that it's not just witnessing the end of the northern white rhinos, it's actually witnessing our own demise. And like you mentioned earlier, Alison, unless we start realizing that we are a part of the natural world, it is watching all of us dying in a way. I mean, to think that we're separate from it is so arrogant. And
mm,
I just feel like this picture resonates on some deep level, where people can understand that and I think it also shows the complexity that I think we do believe in the wonder and the love. Um, but some of us just don't know what to do to protect the planet. And I think the key is also in supporting the communities and these existing habitats. Sorry if I'm sounding so preachy, but like, I believe, this is at Old Pejeta Wildlife Conservancy in Kenya. And, I know Kenya more than other places. There's extraordinary work being done there. And so
mm.
I believe all of us can be supportive of these communities, or at the very least, just being messengers of the great work being done.
Absolutely. I mean, photography has this amazing ability to connect us with the beauty of nature, and to bring out these hidden stories. I know that you like to be a voice for these local communities, to tell their stories. The people on the front line actually getting stuff done. Can photography motivate action? Do you think? Can it bring about change? How do you view your role as a photographer?
I do. I mean, I think I've experienced it a lot, and I think it's an amazing thing, because it really does transcend language, culture. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like. You can look at a picture and understand the universal truths. And I think there are these universal things that we all recognize and understand. And I think also, it's like the kinds of pictures. I really, in the beginning, as I mentioned, I covered conflicts for 10 years.
Mhm.
I was, in the beginning, really asked to focus on the violence, and the sensationalism, the most horrific, the horrors of the world. And I learned then, and I think I apply it to my wildlife work too. It's like, that's not enough. You have to allow people to relate to these images and see themselves in these images. And that's really what I try to do, is like, we could all be Jojo, we can all, and I think it's not enough just to show the violence and the hacked off. I mean, I don't mean to ignore the challenges, and I do show those horrific images when needed. But I think, without talking about the solutions, without giving people a reason to wake up and have hope and believe that there's something else we could be doing, that's not enough. It's not enough just to show the horrors of the world. And that definitely applies to conservation and wildlife and all these stories. So,
I couldn't agree more. And for the longest time, when I first looked at your image, The Last Goodbye, I couldn't help but look at it through a lens of kind of loss and grief. But there is hope there, isn't there, in that relationship between ranger and rhino? There's hope in that.
the bonds are deep and beautiful, and those men commit so much of their lives, and this is the Retenti Elephant Sanctuary that I've been telling the story since the very beginning, when it was just a dream. It's another extraordinary story. It's the first indigenous owned and run elephant sanctuary in all of Africa. The community really said, enough of, we need these elephants in this landscape. We want to protect the wildlife that we coexist with, and they set up their own elephant sanctuary for orphaned babies, and then they rehabilitate them and return them to the wild. The other extraordinary piece of this story is it's the first elephant sanctuary that's hired Indigenous women to be keepers. That's Mary Lengies, and she's a phenomenal keeper. And I found that this story, it was amazing to watch. They're coming up on their 5th anniversary, and it's amazing to watch the transformation of these extraordinary people who came in. The women particularly were maybe a little shy, and now they are so confident and proud of the work that they're doing. And I think that it's not just a story, again, about adorable elephants, though they are, but it's a story about how people relate to the wild and to each other. It's about how the community sees their way forward, the future, the destiny. They're almost rewriting the destiny of their future, and protecting this great, beautiful landscape that they live in. They've got it's the Naminak Wildlife Conservancy, and I think it's close to 1 million acres of really pristine, wild land. And I encourage people to go and visit, or at least support these places online. And
absolutely.
yeah.
And Amy, we are out of time, sadly. It's never long enough. I could talk to you all afternoon. It's been absolutely fantastic hearing your passion. It's contagious, and the way that you look at the world, I find very, very inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing those stories. We've had an anonymous donation, so I just wanted to say thank you to anonymous, whoever you are, for donating. That's very much appreciated. Amy, if people want to find out, see more of your images, you have a website, don't you? amivitale.com, and can they you're on Instagram and Twitter, is that right?
Yes, and my name is AMI. I believe there's like a girl wrestler with AMY, so don't confuse me with her.
We'll put those addresses in the chat for people to follow and to connect with you directly as well. But Amy, I just want to say huge thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for all the work that you do, and thanks for sharing these stories.
Thank you so much. We'll say goodbye to you for now.
Bye.
And thank you so much to you, our viewers, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Thank you again for that donation as well. Very much appreciated. Don't forget, while the museum's doors are closed, you can see Amy's wonderful image and all of the other images from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition on our online gallery, which is on our website. So do check that out. Join us again next week as well. We're going to be back with one of our museum scientists, and we're going to be finding out all about periods in the natural world. So join us again next week, same time. Hope to see you then. Bye for now.